I think there are times that if we were to just measure what it is to walk through this life, particularly in faith, trying to achieve something, trying to follow Christ within the context of trying to do something more than just sort of like survive and float along. I think if we were to judge that by a Sunday morning experience or a video clip of an encouraging motivational message, which I'm all about. I use those things constantly. I attend a local church. I try to engage in things that are encouraging, that are service oriented, that are faith developing. I feed my mind constantly on all the things I can to edify my mind and spirit, motivation, all those things. But I think if we were to judge, life by just those sound clips of life, just those little micro moments that we have, we would say, oh man, all we got to do is really kind of pump ourselves up and no problem, right? Just stay encouraged enough, just stay motivated enough, listen to enough sermons, attend church, pray enough that it's all good. And I think that sometimes we kind of dismiss the fact that in reality, what we actually know in reality, it's not that we don't know it, we do know it, we just don't always address it. We like to sweep under the rug the reality that, sometimes life in our private time, in our family time, in ways that maybe people aren't always seeing, but we're all living, we just don't always want to talk about, that it can be grueling, that there seems to be this force that is against us to sort of devour and maim and rape and pillage and kill and steal and destroy. And if you know biblical scripture at all, that'll sound familiar, that there's a reference that tells us to be sober, to be vigilant, to watch, for our adversary, the devil, seeks like a lion to steal, kill, and destroy. He seeks out our lives to not just hinder us, not just discourage us. It comes in all kinds of shades and forms, but he seeks to really just sort of like take away the power and the effectiveness of our life. What got me thinking on this today was my pastor preached a great sermon on desire, really in the context of both our desire for God and his desire for us. And I think he's probably building towards this. But while I was listening in the same context in the book of Luke, a little further down, where he's talking about desire in those capacities, Jesus addresses one of his disciples, one of his closest friends at the time, and he says this really interesting line. He says, Simon, Simon, which was Peter. All right, so he says, Peter, I've got a message for you. Satan has desired to sift you, to separate you out, to throw you to the wind so that you're no good, you're of no effect. Satan has actually asked for, maybe a context could be demanded. Satan has required, demanded, asked for, desired. We think of Job in these kind of contexts, same kind of idea, that Satan, in the mystery of this background, that it's not just us and God and other people, but there's this force out there that is actually approaching with the audacity, the boldness at times, approaching the throne of God to say, hey, here's the servant of yours, and what I'd like to destroy their life. Now, that's not a good pump me up Sunday morning message, but when we look at our lives, I think for me, it helps me make sense of things at times. Why we can be giving our best, giving our all, doing good to others, going along, and these tornadoes of life come through and rip and just pillage things. Why we can be giving our best and suddenly it feels that we've been thrown to the wolves in lives. And so when Jesus makes this reference, he says, Simon, Simon, Peter, Satan has asked that he may sift you as wheat, but I have prayed for you that when you're converted, basically when you overcome, when you come through what's ahead of you, which he did go through, when you come through it, to turn and strengthen your brethren. So I think that's an interesting concept, that as God is bringing us through these adversities, these attacks, these storms, these things that don't always make sense, that certainly don't even feel fair in the context of life, if we were to just look at our understanding and not from God's view, so many things in life feel impossible. They feel unfair. They feel overwhelming. We can't make sense of them other than putting them into the hands of a good God. And in the context of like Romans 8:28, all things are working together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Not just for that, but that through that we are being shaped and conformed to the image of Christ, that he's shaping the character in us, and he's doing things, he's playing, maybe this is flippant, but I like to think of it as like it's the grand chess game of all time, that God is playing multiple chess games at once that we just can't even comprehend why the pieces need to be moved, how they moved, how we interact with them, how we're affected. But in this context of understanding, there's just going to be times where it's like, I don't understand why it's so difficult, why it's so hard, that Jesus says, even to one of his closest friends, that maybe even more so, that as we walk with God, maybe we have been marked for not just the enemy's attack, but God saying, I can put my weight on this one. I can put my mantle on this one. I can put my calling on this one. But in order to achieve what he needs to do and then come through it and strengthen his brothers, strengthen those around him who will face the same things, boy, they're going to have to go through it. And when I think of another person in the Bible, would be David and Goliath. David was just a young man, and he's out in the field. He goes just to kind of serve and feed his brothers off the battle and war, and he hears this taunting of the giant off in the field saying, no one can defeat me. Like, I'll make you a deal. If any of you can beat me, I'll be your servant. But if I beat you and kill one of your best champions, you will be my servants. You'll be my slaves. And here's the heart of what I want to share today, which is, we all have these giants that are facing us in life. They're taunting us. They're calling us out. They're trying to tempt us to give in, to cower, to fear, to bow, so that they can enslave us. And I know that you face these things too, because I face them on a daily basis. 25 years of knowledge, 25 years of trying and striving and educating, 25 years of the word, 25 years of ministry, 25 years of educating. All those things hasn't put some kind of magic shield up to my mind that the enemy doesn't slide in and just occasionally bring an onslaught of just beckoning and tempting and kind of poking at and taunting and saying, why don't you bow to me? Why don't you just go ahead and be my servant, because you're too weak to defeat me? But in this context, David takes a good assessment that I think is a good thought. He looks at the situation. First of all, you're not just, he wasn't taunting David personally. He was taunting the armies of God. He was mocking God. He was claiming that, your God's not going to deliver you. You're way too weak. Why don't you just go ahead and bow and submit and let us rule you? And David comes onto the scene, and everyone's cowering, and they're like, we can't take care of this giant. And David, just a young man, probably 15, 16 years old, he says, I can do it. But what he asks is important, I think. I think we can really religiousize, kind of spiritualize things. David says, hey, by the way, what is the guy going to get that defeats this giant? And they said, hey, well, he'll be in the favor of the king. He'll get the daughter's king as a wife, like he'll be rewarded. So David kind of takes an assessment. He goes, first of all, I'm not liking this guy's mocking God. I'm not liking he's threatening my brothers and sisters. I'm not liking that he's just out here taunting like no one can defeat him. But when I look at this situation, knowing that, I believe in faith. I think David probably had faith that God could deliver him, but he also understood that I could die in this situation. So as a human being, he said, what is the reward of facing this giant and defeating them? And David understood in that moment that if he could push through this giant, if he could go through this barrier, if he could defeat this giant, that this was something in his way to his destiny, that on the other side of it, his promises that God had already put on his life, he was only following the path of God. He wasn't trying to showboat or make up things to show how great he was. Totally God leading him out into this situation to say, David, here you go. Now, here's a giant you've got to defeat. If you can't defeat this giant, then you can't strengthen your brother. If you can't defeat this giant, then you can't go on to your destiny. And so I just want to encourage you. I want to encourage myself. I'm speaking maybe mostly to myself today, that the giant facing us, that we would somehow dig deep inside, look at the reward, look at the situation, and say, whatever it takes, if I've only got 3 stones in my hand, if I'm as weak and young and feeble as it feels like, but in the name of the Lord, which is what David says, in the Lord of hosts, right? In the name of the God of the armies of all creation, of all things, he says, I come to you in that name, that not in my strength, not in my ability, but in the name of God, I'm going to defeat this giant. And so I just want to encourage you today to keep pushing at that, even if you just got to keep throwing pebbles at that wall, at that barrier, at that mountain, at that giant in your way, because I'm doing much the same thing. I pray for you as you endeavor to defeat the giants in your life. Pray for me as I endeavor to defeat the giants in my life, not just so that we can have an award, not just so we can feel good about ourselves, but if we can't get past these giants, I think it's God promoting us, saying, come on, you can do it. You can defeat this giant, get past them, and past them, you can grow to a level of strength. Because beyond that in David's life, he defeated many giants, and he gathered his brothers around him that followed David, and he delivered those also from oppression, from struggle, from the taunting of the enemy. And that's the real mission. It's not really about us. It's God using these adversities to strengthen us so that we may strengthen others, just like Jesus prayed for Peter. Peter, Satan has asked to have you, but I've prayed for you that your strength would not fail. And when you've come through it, strengthen your brother, encourage those around you. That's my prayer for you. It's my prayer for me. God bless you. Have a great week.